Welcome back to another episode of the Gridiron Guys, and today we are going to be starting a new series where we start to break down each individual fantasy team and see how they're going to be doing for the upcoming season. So we're going to be starting that today with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and basically what we're going to be doing is I'm going to stat out the entire offense, including the QB, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, go over why I have them at these projections, and then analyze where I have them finishing for the upcoming fantasy season. Before we start, there's a few points that need to be made about the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the first and most important part for their fantasy success this year is their offensive line. They have a really good offensive line. It is always top 10 year in and year out. And that gives me much more confidence going into this year to pick Steelers players than a team with a bad offensive line would. It also helps they have a great coach and now a great defense, which will definitely help out for the running game because they look to be ahead in way more games than last year with the return of Big Ben and a great defense. So let's get into it. Let's start with the quarterback because all the stats are going to go off the quarterback, and that is Ben Roethlisberger. After missing basically all of last year, Ben Roethlisberger is back. He says he's better than ever. He's ready to dominate the NFL again. And we will see if that happens. But, I mean, last year was the most games he's ever missed in a year. And I was looking at the stats. He's played 12-plus games in every year prior to missing all of last year. 2013, 2018, played 12-plus games every year. So that has to give you a bit more security, thinking that Big Ben's at least going to give you a majority of the season this season. And the 2 years prior to injury, he threw for 5,100 yards and 4,250 yards, which are big totals. And if Big Ben's able to even get remotely close to replicating that, the Steelers are going to have a few fantasy options every single week. I mean, personally, I think Big Ben's down to decline a bit. He's getting older. The offensive line and skill positions are there for him, but I don't think he has anything near mid-4,000s. I would say a rough range for his yardage this year is 3,800 to 4,200. Because that 1 year where he threw for over 5,000 yards, he was throwing to Antonio Brown and JuJu, arguably a top 5 wide receiver duo in the last 5 years. And his passing touchdowns are a bit harder to project because we don't know how good the Steelers' offense is going to be. But I mean, we can modestly project 25. I think he's been around mid to high 20s throughout his career. I mean, it really depends because from 2013 to 2018, he averaged 28 touchdowns per year. We can modestly project 25, and we can, on a high end, we can project 30. It's anywhere from that range, really. For his season coming up, I have him projected out to be 4,050 yards and 30 passing touchdowns, which seems lofty, but I think that the Steelers have a big bounce back this year, and I like it because their offensive line is good. They're just going to be winning games. They're going to be throwing the ball a lot, and I think he can put up a great season if he plays a full 16 games. Obviously, if he misses some time, those numbers will not come to fruition. But with that stat line, I have Big Ben as the QB 11, but I could definitely see him being as like the QB 13 to 15 because I don't know if that touchdown total will be there. But now, let's go on to the running game. And the only running back that's of any worth or skill in this backfield is really James Conner. They have a few backups in Jaylen Samuels, Benny Snell, and Anthony McFarland, and they all should get some work, but there's no clear-cut number 2 backup that I would even say to roster as a handcuff for Conner. McFarland has the most upside as a rookie, but even him, I don't think he'll be above Jaylen Samuels on that depth chart. So James Conner is the only back worth drafting, and right now I have Conner statted for 200 carries for 880 yards and 5 touchdowns on the ground, and 20 receptions for 250 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns through the air, which would give him about 1,100 scrimmage yards and 8 touchdowns for the year on 220 touches. And I have Conner statted out for around 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns because he has a great offensive line, and I have him at 4.5 yards per carry, which is very efficient for a running back with their good offensive line. But I don't think the Steelers view James Conner as a bell cow back. He hasn't received anywhere near the 300 carry mark in either season, and the Steelers say he's going to be the main guy, but I just don't see the Steelers giving him 20 to 25 touches a game because I don't think that's James Conner. I just think he is a low-tier RB1 for like an NFL team, and he projects to be a mid-tier to low-tier RB2 for the upcoming season. And that's mainly just because he's not built like a back who can be seeing 300 plus carries. He'll get 220 to 250, similar to Alvin Kamara, and be very efficient, but I think that's about it. Right now, I have a stat line to be projected out as the RB21, which is very similar to his ADP, and I think he's a good value, but he also offers a decent amount of risk because there's a lot of factors that you don't know what you're getting with James Conner. For one, he will greatly suffer if Big Ben goes down. Two, he's also shown he can miss some time in his career. And three, I mean, there are some decent backups there. I mean, if the Steelers do go running back by committee, I wouldn't be completely surprised, but I think he's the guy. I think him at RB21 is a good value. You're getting a safe back, should be very consistent on a weekly basis. So I like James Conner for this upcoming season, as I like Big Ben. And now let's move into the wide receiver rankings, and that's starting with JuJu Smith-Schuster. And I found myself taking JuJu Smith-Schuster in one of my recent fantasy drafts, and I wasn't sure if I want to take him because I feel like he's a hard player to project because his range of outcomes is so great. He could struggle to have a good season this year because there's a lot of things that are changing for him. He is playing without Antonio Brown. He is moving back to the slot where he thrived in college, and he played well when he had his great seasons in his first and second season. And we don't know what the receivers around him are going to do. Is there going to be any help? Is there going to be another threat on the outside so that team can't focus all on JuJu? And I think JuJu is going to be pretty good this season for a few reasons. First of all, it's a contract year. And the Steelers do not re-sign players on their contract year, especially wide receivers, letting the likes of Emmanuel Sanders, Mike Wallace leave. Those are really good wide receivers that the Steelers just let walk. And I think JuJu knows that Pittsburgh's probably not going to pay him. So he's going to be out there on the unrestricted free agent market. And he's got to ball out this year because he's playing for his probably next 4 or 5 year contract, and he needs to make the money. Going back to the slot, I think he will be getting some mismatches that he wasn't seeing last year on the outside that will help him make some plays. I mean, some number one corners will obviously follow him, but I mean, he'll get some mismatches. But let's get into the numbers. Last year, JuJu was terrible. He didn't see any targets, no yards, this wide receiver like around 50, but it's because he did not get the ball thrown to him, and those targets were of terrible quality. Last year, in games which JuJu received 7+ targets, with and without Big Ben, in those 5 games, he averaged 84 yards per game, catching 26 of 39 targets, around 66%, which is a good catch rate, for 2 touchdowns. If you average out those games where he got 7+ targets, and none of those games were over 10, so he got 7 to 10 targets in 5 games. If you average those games out, he would have been around 1,300 yards for 83 receptions and 6 touchdowns, which would have finished him as a top 12 wide receiver last season. Which shows, if he gets the volume in the passing game, give him 8 targets a game, which is around 128 targets for next season, he will put up wide receiver 1 numbers. It's a lot of volume for JuJu. I mean, it definitely helps if Big Ben's throwing the ball to Mason Rudolph or Duck Hodges because there's a big talent and target difference there. But if Big Ben plays 12+ games, JuJu, in seeing 7+ targets a game, he'd be finishing as wide receiver 1 in my opinion. I think with a full 16, even 12 from Big Ben, JuJu will be seeing a big workload because the other receivers around him are just not that good. They're not going to be commanding a big workload, but I think they're good enough to take some attention off to JuJu, and we're gonna get there in a minute. And I just think he's being undervalued slightly in drafts right now. being able to get him in the mid to late third, even fourth round. I know his ADP is a bit higher, but I see him falling, is pretty valuable. As a wide receiver, too, he offers elite upside, which is great in a wide receiver, too. And right now, I have him statted out for 80 receptions on around 130 targets for 1,206, which is confident. But I think if Big Ben plays 12, 13, even 14 games, JuJu will easily get that yardage marker and reception marker. And who knows, maybe he scores more touchdowns. But I think he is a safe bet to exceed and outperform his ADP. And I think one reason why JuJu this year will play better than most expect is because the other receivers around him are more talented than people give them credit for. And one of them is Deontae Johnson. Last year, Deontae Johnson was another Steelers receiver where you're like, how did they find these guys? He played really well. No games with 10-plus targets. And he put up 680 and 5 last year with terrible QB play, which is pretty dang good for not getting a lot of targets. He saw 92 targets and put up 680 and 5, which is pretty good. He should see that mark go to 110, 120. Who knows, maybe even more. Big Ben returns to form, and the Steelers are a big passing team. One concern I have with him is he's going to be playing the X receiver a lot more because JuJu is going to be playing a lot in the slot. And will he be matching up with the number one opposing corner? I think he will sometimes, which will definitely hurt him because he's not a dominant receiver like that yet. But I think the volume should increase for him. He is a relatively talented player. Big Ben throwing the ball will definitely help him out. I think that Deontae Johnson will finish with around 70 for 850 and 6. I have him as the wide receiver 34 for the upcoming season. And I think if he starts to play well, it'll definitely open up things for JuJu being a second option. And I also like the Steelers' third and fourth receiver in James Washington and Chase Claypool. Now, these are not guys that I would roster in fantasy, but they're going to help Deontae Johnson and JuJu because James Washington, first, can stretch the field. He is a big play threat. I mean, we don't want guys who are going to take the ball away from them. We want guys who are going to open up the field. Chase Claypool is a big-bodied receiver who will be a threat in the red zone, but he will also help move the chains on third down. He's another deep threat. I mean, neither will be really relevant. I was surprised Washington came up with 700 yards last year, but I think they'll help stretch the field for JuJu and Deontae Johnson next year. Now moving into the tight ends for the Steelers, we have Eric Ebron, a new addition, and Vance McDonald. And Vance McDonald was getting a lot of hype last year and was kind of a fantasy bust because we expected him to be a big catch guy, a lot of touchdowns with Big Ben. Big Ben got hurt, and then Vance McDonald was utterly useless with the backup quarterbacks that the Steelers had last year. Now, neither will be really fantasy relevant this year because, first of all, in the tight end position, it's about opportunity, and I don't think either will see anywhere close to 100 targets. If I was going to take a shot on one, I would take a shot on Ebron because we've seen that Ebron can thrive by scoring touchdowns with low targets and low yardage. He scored, I think, 12 to 13 that one year. He has potential to do that again, but I don't think he will, and I wouldn't draft him. I wouldn't draft either of these guys, but I think it will be helpful and be maybe a weekly streaming option down the line against some good matchups. Overall, though, the Steelers are going to be a bounce-back offense this year. I think they're going to be one of the best teams in the AFC challenging Baltimore for the division. If Big Ben as I've said numerous times, if he plays 12 or more games, I think Connor is a viable RB2. I think JuJu is a high-end wide receiver 2. And I think Deontae Johnson is a sneaky good flex play and a definitely worth a late-round flyer in the 9th and 10th round. Because we've seen Pittsburgh receivers take that second-year jump. Look at JuJu. 800 yards to around 1,400 from year 1 to year 2. Am I saying Deontae Johnson will do that? No, I am not. But I'm saying he has potential to do so. There's going to be a lot of yards to go around this offense, and it's definitely possible that Deontae Johnson starts to cut into James Washington, Chase Claypool, and Eric Ebron's yardage totals because he starts playing really, really good. So we will see. But I'm going to be continuing the series. Some teams that I'm going to be getting into in the near future are the Dolphins, the Bengals, teams that are harder to project because there's a lot of new things there. Like, We don't know when Tua's going to play. We don't know when Burrow's going to play. Cincinnati has 5 receivers. Miami just lost 2 receivers. Preston Williams is back. 2 new running backs. Sometimes it's hard. I find myself not knowing where to select these guys in fantasy drafts, and I'm going to be statting them out and explaining where I would draft each player. And as always, make sure to like and subscribe, and check us out on Instagram at gridiron_guys_YT.